Let's continue to get your reaction to the tragic developments in the Johannesburg CBD today. And Thapelo Mohapi is the General Secretary of Abahlali Bsemjondolo, and he joins us now. Good evening and welcome, Thapelo. Many families are in mourning tonight. What's going through your mind?
Good evening to you. Good evening to the viewers. It's a very difficult time for the families that have lost their loved one, and we'd like to send our deepest condolences. And we hope that during this very trying times, they find comfort, that we are in solidarity with them as the poorest of the poor.
We are told, as this, anatomy of the tragedy is being laid bare, we're told that people had built shacks inside the building, that it resembled an informal settlement in many ways. Share with us from your research why shacks and dwellings such as this become a last resort for people.
Yes, out of desperation, out of not having access to land, out of people wanting to be closer to the cities, the right that have been people were denied during the apartheid regime. They are finding ways out of desperation to actually find shelter wherever they can so that they can be closer to opportunities. Unfortunately, we know that there are syndicates who are taking opportunities of the poverty of the people on the ground. And we are very disappointed that the government of that day is not doing enough to actually ensure that they provide affordable housing for the poor and marginalized people to be closer to the cities. Cities have become very expensive for the poorest of the poor who work in the city, and therefore people find other ways that they can actually provide themselves some form of shelter.
What you're sharing is a situation of utter desperation. We heard, I don't know if you were able to hear the president talk about, being able to cut through red tape, making it so that the city is able to better respond to situations where there is a deep housing need. Do you believe, Thapelo, through the work that you're doing and the engagements that you have, that the city, in fact, not only just this city, but cities around the country are taking this issue seriously?
Well, there has been a number of engagements trying to get the government on board. I mean, we've written numerous letters with our partner, the Inner City Federation and the Socio-Economic Rights Institute, to actually find ways to find amicable solution to this crisis. We understand there's a crisis, but the response in which the city of Johannesburg wants to deal with this is to massively evict people unlawfully. And today, of course, you must have heard that many of the NGOs that are progressive, like the Socio-Economic Rights Institute, have been blamed for the crisis that is there. But there are many ways that we have tried to get the city on board so that we can engage in finding amicable ways to actually address this problem that we are facing with these buildings and fix these buildings to be human habitats for the poorest of the poor that wants to come into the city to make a living.
When you talk about the poorest of the poor, you can only imagine, the type of access that they have to resources then, to be able to, and we understand a lot of families here, because we heard, a number of children are among those deceased. So families trying to find a dwelling, a safe place for themselves just about anywhere, finding themselves in these situations. And ostensibly, this is a hijacked building. We hear a lot about what happens in terms of the massive exploitation of people who live in these dwellings, particularly when there are slum lords that are in charge of taking rent and so on. What can you share with us about that story, Thapelo?
Yes, we will not shy away from the problem of rich people who, some of them are officials of the municipality, who have access to these buildings, are actually collecting rent from the poorest of the poor. And people, because they are desperate and do not want to pay the high rents, and then they pay whatever they can from these individuals. And this is a crisis that we have been calling for as Abahlali Bsemjondolo. Even in the informal settlement, we have what is called shack farming. And that's why you find a lot of shacks being burnt down as a result of congestion. It's not because one of the crises is the non-availability of land, but it's actually people, officials in the municipalities, at some extent ward councillors, who are actually making people rent their shacks, rent in these buildings, and so forth. And that is because people don't want to come forward, because out of desperation, out of wanting to live into the cities so that they can make a better life, people don't come forward, and these tragedies happen. And
Thapelo, just because we're running out of time, very critical what you're saying. I don't think I've ever come across the concept of shack farming per se as a term and as a practice, but in both the examples around the hijacked buildings and shack farming, as you term it, you are talking about officials from the city who are involved. What have you done with those names and the identities of those people who are really preying on the most vulnerable in our society? In fact, not just preying on them, but profiting off their suffering.
Yes, one of the reasons why we want to sit down with the both cities in Durban, we have the same crisis when it comes to shacks, and we have the same crisis when it comes to the buildings in Johannesburg. And we are saying that the city must sit down with the people that are affected, those that are in these buildings, that are living without the basic services like water and sanitation, and find amicable solutions. And these people that are doing this will be sidelined and will be known in openly. And this speaks directly to the corruption that is happening in our country, that city officials can even go to an extent to actually, rent out stands and rent out these buildings.
This is certainly worth a follow-up, especially with the intention of ensuring that something like this, a tragedy like this, which was avoidable, never ever happens again. Thapelo Mohapi is the Secretary General of Abahlali Bsemjondolo.